everyone, it's Maddie, and today I'll be recommending 5 books that are must-reads from an Ivy League student hoping to study creative writing. The first book on this list is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Afghan-American author Khaled Hosseini. If this author sounds familiar, it's probably because you've either heard of or read The Kite Runner, his debut novel. This is a 2007 novel, and it's categorized as historical fiction or war fiction. Now, The Kite Runner has a male-dominated character list, while this book is all about the lives of Afghan women. When asked about why he decided to write this book, Hosseini discusses how there are so many stories about the cruelties and tragedies that Afghan women suffer, specifically the gender-based discrimination and violence they face. Hosseini wanted to write a novel that was focused entirely on the lives of these women and their perseverance and strength. So, 1,000 Splendid Suns focuses on 2 characters, Mariam and Layla. Mariam is 20 years Layla's senior, and the book opens with a discussion of Mariam's life and the circumstances that have led her to be married to a horribly evil man named Rashid. And then we learn about Layla's life and how various circumstances also lead to her being forced into marrying Rashid. Now at this point, Rashid is several decades older than both Mariam and Layla, and is an incredibly abusive and violent man towards the both of them. When Layla is taken as Rashid's new young bride who he hopes will bear her a son, unlike Mariam who has been unable to, Mariam starts off resenting and hating Layla for her position in their household and for the additional abuse Mariam begins to face now that Layla is the preferred wife. However, Mariam soon realizes that Layla is in the exact same situation than her, leading a life that she does not want and facing violence she does not deserve. Soon, the two began to bond and form a camaraderie, hoping to find the strength to escape their abusive husband and leave this life that they know behind. This is just a brief plot summary of what the book is about, but there's so much more going on. If you've read The Kite Runner or And the Mountains Echoed, you know that Hosseini is an incredibly descriptive author. His writing is so imaginative and all the characters are so well developed that you can really feel their pain. I love all of his other books, but this one has to be the one that I enjoyed the most, potentially because I felt like I could empathize more with the characters that Hosseini writes about. Overall, I felt like this book was about a mother and daughter relationship, but really about the perseverance of women and the strength and love that women have to overcome any challenges they're facing. However, here are a few reasons you might not like the book or why you might actually hate the book. First of all, The Kite Runner is considered to be Hosseini's most popular book. So if you're a diehard fan of The Kite Runner, you might find that this book is lacking or just not your cup of tea. Another reason why you might not like this book is because it's extremely graphic and violent when discussing the violence that Mariam, Layla, and in general Afghan women face. I've even heard people describe this book as too graphic and overly cruel. Some people even saying that the book doesn't have a real plot. It's just one tragedy that Mariam and Layla face and have to overcome after another, making the book pretty difficult to read and get through it. If you're looking for a more uplifting book or something cheerful, this book is not for you. The last complaint that I've heard about this book is in general the way women are portrayed. Specifically the characters of Mariam and Layla. Some people argue that Hosseini falls into the trope of man writing women sometimes when he's describing Mariam and Layla. This may be true in some portions of the book, but I didn't think it was something that was overly overt or took away from the novel overall. But it's up to you. Let me know if you read this book and what you think. The second book that I would recommend as a must-read is Normal People by Sally Rooney. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the book as I read it online, so we'll just have to make do with this cover for now. I read Normal People this past year, and I absolutely love this book. I've read it way more times than I think is healthy, but I just love the story and I love the characters. Normal People focuses on 2 characters, Connell and Marianne, and their complicated yet intricate relationship. The book follows them in their last year of secondary school and as they both move on to Trinity College in Dublin. Connell begins the book as an attractive, popular, athletic, highly intelligent boy who's loved by all of his peers, while Marianne is hated by her peers, viewed as weird despite being highly intelligent. Connell and Marianne begin to have a secret relationship that he asks Marianne not to tell anyone about at school, because although he doesn't want to admit it, he's ashamed of their relationship and in some parts of being attracted to Marianne. We follow their lives as they enter college at Trinity, where now Marianne becomes attractive, cool, considered highly intelligent, and worshipped by the rest of her peers, while Connell, for the first time in his life, struggles to fit in, feeling unwanted and different from the rest of his peers. The book spends its time discussing how the pair drift in and out of each other's lives throughout their teenagehood and later in their 20s. Much of the content focuses on the constant miscommunication between Marianne and Connell, which is the main obstacle that stands in the way of their happiness and of what both of them really want, which is to be together. To be completely honest, I had never heard of Sally Rooney until a couple of months ago, when I was in a situation that is pretty similar to Marianne and Connell's. This is not a tea-spill session, but when I was going through the situation and trying to get out of it, I was talking to one of my friends about how frustrated I was and how I felt like no one really understood what this type of dynamic is like. She told me that I should totally read Normal People and that I would love it and maybe even find some closure through reading the book. So I found an online copy on my computer and I read it in less than 4 hours. I think that this is a stunning book. I didn't quite enjoy Rooney's writing style at first, and I did open the book or open my computer and think to myself, is this a joke, when I saw absolutely no quotation marks being used to mark dialogue? But since then, I've come to understand and appreciate the nuances of all of her writing. Now, some reasons for why you might hate this book. Even though I hadn't heard of Rooney, I started to do a lot of research about her after I'd finished reading Normal People, and I came to realize that people in general are just quite split on Rooney's writing style and whether or not they like her books. On the one hand, people love her simplistic writing that includes plenty of political and economic commentary that is both entertaining and relevant to an Irish millennial. On the other hand, I've heard plenty of people say that they think her writing style is overrated, boring, and not quite giving anything. It seems Rooney is also in part responsible for the popularity of the character known as Waif Girl. One article defines Waif Girl as being a barrel of contradictions, normal but extraordinary, socially awkward but the center of attention, drab but hot, sexless but sexy, virginal but seductive. Yikes. It's true that sometimes Sally Rooney does fall into the trope of creating characters that seem one-dimensional. Actually, I read Conversations with Friends after I loved Normal People so much, but found myself being disappointed. I couldn't find a real plot in this book, and I didn't particularly like any of the characters that Rooney had written about. At times, it does seem that Rooney's writing can become repetitive, and that she continues to use a female trope similar to Manic Pixie Dream Girl. A barrel of contradictions, if you will. Even my friend who recommended Normal People to me told me that she couldn't get through the whole book, even after multiple attempts at reading. Plenty of people I know couldn't drag themselves to the finish line of this book or even sympathize with any of the characters Rooney's written about. And yet, I loved Normal People. Part of me thinks that this may just be because I was in a position similar to Marianne and Connell's, so reading the book gave me a sense of closure and made me feel like I wasn't quite alone in developing a relationship similar to theirs. But the other part of me really doesn't want to give up on Rooney's books. So if you've read Normal People or anything by Rooney, let me know what you think. And if not, just go ahead and give Normal People a try. The third book I would recommend everyone to read is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. Everything I Never Told You has one of the greatest opening lines I've ever read. Lydia is dead, but they don't know this yet. This story is about a mixed-race Chinese-American girl named Lydia Lee who is found drowned in the center of a lake. She is the middle child of the Lee family and has been the favorite child to both of her parents, Marilyn and James, for as long as the entire family can remember. Her death is absolutely devastating to her parents, and her older brother, Nath, and little sister, Hannah, have always felt eclipsed by their sister. So now that she's gone, neither of them are sure how to connect with their parents or how to help them through their grief. This book has two main focuses. One, how this family dynamic came to be, and second, how the family is able to move forward and handle their grief. I read Little Fires Everywhere before I read this book, and I absolutely love that book. I put off reading it for a really long time because of how popular it was, but after I read it, I knew I wanted to read more by this author. So I decided to try out Everything I Never Told You, and it turns out I love this book even more than I loved reading Little Fires Everywhere. As someone who is biracial and Chinese American, I really identified with a lot of Ng's writing, and especially her descriptions of the various microaggressions and racist behavior that the Lee family encounters. She talks a lot about how Lydia feels torn between two different worlds growing up and just feels really lost and out of place, and I definitely resonated with her writing on that. This book is so descriptive. The author has an incredible ability to place characters in extremely complex situations. Her characters make mistake after mistake and constantly miscommunicate with one another, but that is something that is so incredible about this book, is that it allows its characters to mess up and to see where that mistake takes them. This is a story about an incredibly dysfunctional family where everything seems perfectly fine on the surface, but underneath, we realize just how easy it is to miscommunicate and misunderstand the very people that we live with and love. A couple of reasons for why you might hate this book. Well, first of all, this might not be reason to hate it, but I've generally found that Little Fires Everywhere, Ng's second novel, has gained more popularity than this one. I don't know if that's just the way that I've found things, but that seems to be the case. So even if you think nothing can top Little Fires Everywhere, just give this book a chance. The second and most major reason of why you might dislike this book. Everyone is so obnoxious in this book. Each one of the members of the Lee family screws up in such a colossal way that has repercussions on every other member of their family. When I'm reading this book, I really have to take a step back, put on my writer's cap, and think about how amazing it is that Ng is even able to make me feel so much rage from a character. When I'm about to boil over in rage over something a character said or a decision they make, I just have to remind myself that it is such a great way to create a nuanced character and to really humanize them. Even Lydia herself, who seems to be painted as a victim in the beginning in the book, is incredibly infuriating the more you read the novel. This book does a great job of showing how flawed humans can be and how much we can actually hurt a person when we really think we're just doing what's best for them and want them to be happy. The only other reason you might not like this book is I found the ending to be a little vague and a little bit lacking in closure. I think the book does do a great job of tying together questions that readers might have, but there are still some things that are left unsaid, and you sort of have to read in between the lines. If you just give this book a try though, you'll find yourself automatically lost in the whole story and wanting to know everything about every single character. The fourth book is one of my favorite novels that I've ever read, and it's the 2014 Pulitzer Prize winner, The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I absolutely adore this book, even though I've only ever read it once. I discovered this book through the movie, which was a box office flop, but a movie that my mom and I watched together, and we actually really loved it. So I don't know what's going on with that. But after watching, I read the book and was completely captivated by Tartt's writing style. I've also read her other novel, The Secret History, which is another book I thoroughly enjoyed. This plot is incredibly dense and complicated, so I'll read you a quote that's included on the first page of my copy. In this astonishing Dickensian novel, Miss Tartt uses her myriad talents, her tactile prose, her knowledge of her characters' inner lives, her instinct for suspense, to immerse us in a fully imagined fictional world that reminds us of the wonderful stay-up-all-night pleasures of reading. The novel is at once a thriller involving the theft of a famous Dutch painting, a panoramic portrait of New York and America in the post-9/11 era, and an old-fashioned coming-of-age story about an orphan named Theo who, with his best friend Boris, one of the great recent fictional creatures, will enter the pantheon of classic buddy acts alongside Laurel and Hardy, Vladimir and Estragon, and Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. This review was written by Michiku Kakutani of the New York Times. To give you a little more information about the plot than that, the book's protagonist is 13-year-old Theo Decker. He survives a terrorist attack on the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In the attack, his beloved mother is killed, and he accidentally comes into the possession of a Carol Fabricius painting known as the Goldfinch. It's a beautiful painting, and I highly encourage you to look up the painting and read the story behind it and more about the artist's life. After the death of Theo's mother, his father abandons him and he's sent to live with a rich friend and classmate's family, known as the Barbers. The only thing that brings Theo comfort throughout the book is his connection and possession of this painting, and also a relationship he forms with a man named Hobie, who runs an antique shop and sort of becomes a father figure to Theo. But you have to read the book to find out how this relationship is formed. We encounter various circumstances that change Theo's physical location and ultimately how he returns to New York and gets caught up in an art theft scandal, mainly due to his possession of the Goldfinch, a painting that he never ends up returning and instead holds onto throughout his 20s. I think that this book is essentially a Bildungsroman. It's basically an ode to art history and to the permanence of beautiful things. I think this is one of the most incredible novels I've ever read. And I love the way that Tart is able to describe every moment, every character, and every detail so beautifully that it really immerses you into the world that she has created. However, there are a few reasons why you might hate this book. This isn't really a reason per se, but this is a mammoth of a book. It's close to 800 pages, and it did take me quite a chunk of time to read, not just because of the length, but also because the plot is very complicated, very dense, and sometimes the amount of details that Tart includes can get overwhelming. So this definitely took a good amount of time to get through. Another complaint I've heard is that Tart's writing is really sophisticated and borders on pretentious at times. She can come across as kind of snooty sometimes when you're reading, and unfortunately, I have to admit that there were moments where I found myself zoning out in her writing, either because there's a mammoth amount of detail in some sections, or because her character gets caught up in a long philosophical soliloquy that doesn't seem like it's gonna end anytime soon. I've done a lot of research about Tart and her writing style, and reviews of her are generally polarized. Basically, she's the maximalist version of Sally Rooney. Booklist describes this novel as drenched in sensory detail, and I have to agree with that. Some people generally aren't sure if Tart is a good writer, or if she's just capable of stringing together so many adjectives in one sentence that it's so long and you have to say it's good writing. Just like in the quote I read earlier, I've heard her work described as Dickensian, and I've heard Tart be called the modern-day Charles Dickens. I haven't read a lot of Dickens, so I don't know if this is particularly a good or bad thing, but if Dickens is not your cup of tea, then you might not be particularly satisfied with Tart's writing. However, I urge you to read this beautiful book and see if you get lost in the story the same way that I did. The fifth and final book I'm going to talk about in this video is The Joy Luck Club. This is a 1989 novel by Amy Tan, and it focuses on 4 Chinese immigrant families who now live in San Francisco. The families in the book belong to the Joy Luck Club, a club where they come to play mahjong and dine together. The entirety of the book uses several vignettes to describe the mother-daughter relationship between the Chinese immigrant mothers of the families and their now Chinese American daughters who have grown up in the United States. Basically, in the book, we get to read a story from each mother and each daughter and learn about the nature of their relationship. Since the plot is sort of tied together through various short stories, I don't want to go into detail about any of the specific relationships that we learn about or any of the specific vignettes that are featured in the book. I'll just try to convince you about why you should read it. Having a Chinese mother, I grew up hearing my mom talk about this book or seeing her watch it on the television. I was too young to understand the importance of the book or movie at the time, but a few years ago, I finally got a copy and was able to read it. I literally cried on page 1 of this book. Actually, I sat down, opened it, and cried at one of the first sentences that Tan had written. It's probably the only book that has ever made me cry on the first page. I have found this book to be so beautiful and such a clear and poignant portrait of the relationships between Chinese mothers and their Chinese American daughters. I really identified with the way mother-daughter relationships are portrayed within this book, and especially how Tan emphasizes the importance of culture and remembering where you came from, and remembering that at the end of the day, mothers want what's best for their daughters. I cannot say enough how beautiful I found this book and how much I just loved reading it and feeling like there was a piece of me and my mom within it. But here are some reasons why you might not like this book. Over the years, it hasn't been very well received by the new generation of Asian Americans. In its initial publication, The Joy Luck Club was praised for depicting the lives and culture of Asian Americans and their immigrant families. But the problem was, for a long time, Tan was the only author who had the opportunity to do this, or who received such widespread success from her novel. Because she was one of the few successful authors to find an American audience with stories about Asian cultures, The Joy Luck Club hasn't held up too well since it's been considered to be the staple piece about Chinese American culture for so long. Because it's not just been one out of hundreds of stories that have been included, but really only the book about Asian culture for so many decades, people began to worry that it was depicting and perpetuating racist stereotypes to a wider audience and basically spreading misinformation about the Chinese culture. There are complaints that the book depicts Chinese culture in a bad light, making it seem widely cruel and misogynistic. Furthermore, another reason that people have not looked at the book kindly is because of the opinion that it does not portray men in a great way, specifically Asian men. People have said that the book depicts men as the enemy, that they are backwards and unlikable figures. So people worry that one of the other stereotypes Tan perpetuates is the trope of Asian men being undesirable and unlikable figures. Also, I didn't know this until I was doing research for this book, but apparently this book is banned in some places for having explicit content or for not lining up with community values. I did not know this, and I don't think any book deserves to be banned. But for some reason, it ended up on a banned book list. While I think all of the concerns I listed are definitely legitimate, I do believe that we can forgive the flaws of this book because after all, Amy Tan is one author and the Joy Luck Club is just one book. I don't think Tan ever intended for this book to be so widely popular that it was accepted as the defining definition and guide to Asian families and Chinese American culture. As for the argument of the negative depiction of male characters or the lack of focus on male characters, my answer for that is the Joy Luck Club is not about men. It's about the relationship between mothers and daughters and how the thread of culture ties them together so deeply. It's about the complexity of love between mother and daughter, how Chinese and American culture fight and clash against one another when it comes to immigrant families, but how despite any generational or cultural conflicts, these relationships last the test of time because of the bond that exists between mothers and daughters. I hope you'll give this novel a try because Tan's writing is wonderful, and her portrayal of relationships will tug at your heart every step of the way. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I really hope you'll give one of the novels I suggested a chance. Let me know if you do, or if you've already read one of these books and what your thoughts on them are. Do you love them or do you hate them? Thanks for watching. Bye!